It's my first time at ISE. Really impressive. Lots of amazing things going on. There was the XR symposium that was yesterday, the VR, AI, MR, all that kind of stuff. Amazing stuff. There was a smart connected buildings session that was run. There's lots of incredible things here. And when I'm just walking around and having a look, it always makes me realize that I wish that I had much more money than I actually have. But I'm very fortunate in that although I can't necessarily walk around and buy all these things, I do work in an industry where I get to apply them and to use them and get my hands on them. Because I work for AKQA, which is a creative agency, a digital creative agency. And over the years, AKQA have some messages and some slides that kind of come in fashion and out of fashion. And this is one from some years ago that nobody else apart from me still uses. I really like it. Avoiding the beaten path, seeking terrain unexplored. When we're looking at these new things, this is the excitement, isn't it? This is the fun, the imagination that comes out of getting involved in these kind of new technologies. But there's a danger with getting too carried away with the unexplored terrain. And that is that when we're looking to apply these new technologies, we do it in order to be first, to be in the kind of the gold rush of getting things out there quickly, to look really pioneering, and to do things largely because we can, which is not really the right reason to be looking to do things with these emerging technologies. Because then really what we're involved in is novelty value. And when novelty value is the thing that we're targeting, we're in trouble because novelty value doesn't last very long. So you've probably been in places, high street stores, for example, where there's like some big screen or an experience or an Oculus Rift off to one side and it's not really being used anymore because the gloss went and the wow factor went and the thing it was actually doing didn't really add any value or solve any problem. So the trick really, I think, in looking to apply emerging technologies is to avoid this novelty value. Bill Gates said that the advance of technology is actually about making it so that the technology is barely noticeable. So it's just a part of everyday life. And that means moving away from an idea of using these things because we can, and actually using them where they're needed, where they actually can make a difference, where they fill a void and solve a problem, and really move things forward and give people a better experience than they would have had before. So what I'm going to do over the next 25 minutes or so is just go through three kind of big territories of voice and VR and AI, each of which you could comfortably do a session or a morning or a day on their own. I'm going to go over these things and show some work that's been done, some by us, some by other people. Doesn't really matter who did it. The point is, hopefully, in looking at some of this work, seeing the through line in the ethos that's behind it, in the thinking that's been brought to it, in the application of these technologies. So I'm going to start out looking at voice. And voice is an interesting one, because we're really not looking too far back to an idea when this really was novelty. When Siri first arrived on iPhones, the thing to do was to ask it some amusing question, like open the pod bay doors, Hal, this kind of thing, and get some novelty response, laugh, put it away, because it wasn't that good, it felt kind of weird. Then when Alexa came out, the idea of standing in an empty room, talking to a black plastic box that spoke back to you, was a very awkward thing. It's become normalized really, really fast, that behavior. Now actually walking into a room where we know there's a Google Home or an Alexa there, we just talk out loud to the room and expect the room to answer back to us. It's weird when it doesn't, which is actually a very human thing to do. It's how we treat each other, in fact. We don't really look at each other and study each other for responses. It's a very offhand way to communicate. So voice is a very natural human way to behave. If you think about mice, keyboards, trackpads, even swipes, they're abstract methods of getting things to do the things we want them to do. Our natural tendency is just to ask. So voice has taken off. It's also very cheap. Obviously, these devices are 30, 40 euros or whatever, so they become mainstream very quickly, which encourages a lot of things to be done. Now, most voice applications are not that good. Sturgeon's law, I don't know if you know it, Theodore Sturgeon, science fiction author from the 60s and 70s. Sturgeon's law, 99% of everything is rubbish. It's because a critic said 99% of science fiction is rubbish, and he said, well, yeah, 99% of everything is rubbish. So on iPhones, most apps are not that great. The 1% are great because they really understand how the technology should be used and the benefits it can bring, and understands the human experience behind using them. So that's what we're going to be looking at with a couple of things here, where voice is a natural way to solve a problem. Now, this is something that we did with a video game, Destiny. I don't know if any of you guys play Destiny. Destiny is pretty complicated. A lot of games these days are very, very complicated. I grew up playing games like Tekken, which are not very complicated. So I only really had to bash some keys together, and that was all about my limit, really. But these games have an assistant built into them. And in Destiny, there is a character called the Ghost, which is your assistant taking you through the game. But if you're going to engage with the assistant, it takes you out of the game. You have to stop what you're doing, and then you speak to the assistant, and you go through different sections and work with it. We wanted to actually enable you to have an assistant with you all the time while you just keep playing the game. So it's like playing the game basically with a person sitting next to you that you're talking to. So the Ghost is actually a skill. We actually built, this is what the Ghost looks like. We actually ended up making an Alexa in the shape of the Ghost. And it's connected to the game. So it's connected to you, connected to the game, connected to your profile, so it can make in-game changes dynamically. And you just talk to it. Ask it for help, ask it for advice, ask it to change things as you're moving through the game. It's a very natural way to play, because if there was someone sitting next to you, this is how you would play. And this is the kind of thing where you have an experience which is amazing playing these games, where you can actually improve it, particularly for beginners, by giving them this kind of experience, and voice is the natural way to do it. A completely different demographic is the previous generations, the elderly generations, our parents, our grandparents. These people are not the natural home for these kind of amazing, exciting new technologies. They're not the early adopters. But in fact, particularly when it comes to voice, they are exactly the kind of people where it can make a huge difference because of the natural way that you interact and the kind of relationship that you can create. This is extremely simple. This is in the States, the American Association of Retired People, the AARP. Huge, huge numbers of people. And all this is a flash briefing. The simplest thing that it can be done on an Alexa, flash briefing. And all it does is bring relevant, pertinent news and information to these people who it's supremely relevant for, contextually done, so that they don't have to find these things and look them up on a whole bunch of different devices and services they may not be entirely comfortable with. So very, very simple. Using these technologies does not have to be massively complicated. It can be very, very simple, make a big difference. Something that was slightly more complicated was, again, with Alexa. And Amazon were keen to do two things. One, they wanted to promote a television series, Jack Ryan, which is kind of an espionage thriller series on Amazon Prime. Two, they wanted to show the breadth of use for the device for voice, particularly in home automation. Most people who I know who have Alexas and Google Homes love them, but don't do much more with them than use them to set timers and ask the weather, and are kind of unaware of how you can move beyond that. So in order to demonstrate, we learn by doing, in order to kind of demonstrate what can be done with voice, and for Jack Ryan, we built an escape room at Comic-Con, one of the more fun projects to be involved in, at Comic-Con in New York and then in San Diego. And everything in the escape room, the only interaction for everything is voice, is through Alexa, in trying to escape. And there are 60-odd different skills here, voice skills, all of them IoT integrations. So there's turning on fans, there's changing lights into UV so you can see codes on bits of paper. opening doors, changing locks, all these different things. There's about 60 of them. There's actors from the series actually involved in the escape room. I had about 1 million people watched on Twitch. All the sessions sold out. But really the message, obviously, apart from promoting Jack Ryan, is that people understand and people see how these devices can do so much more than merely set timers, tell you the weather. In fact, these things are how you can control your environment and the things that you do in your everyday life. So voice is a very, very powerful, yet very, very simple tool to get people working completely new ways. And to Bill Gates' point, it actually becomes very quickly something which is just indivisible from life's routines. And that's what makes voice skills powerful, is when they have a routine, when they are something that you do often, that you come back to, that it's a part of everyday life. As with all apps, for all platforms, there are way, way too many things that you install, use once, never use again. Or that you install, use once or twice, the glamour wears off, never come back to. Things that become part of everyday life are very, very powerful. So moving to virtual reality and augmented reality and these things hasn't become as massively mainstream as voice yet. It's been around for a while now. We did a project with Oculus Rift back in 2012, and it was just rolled off Kickstarter before it was acquired by Facebook. So it's been around for a while now. Obviously, there is a cost factor here, where you can pick up Google Homes and Amazon Alexas for $30, $40. If you look at Oculus Quest and say that this is the de facto standard for like domestic VR experiences, that's still about 10 times as much as a Google Home or an Alexa. So although it becomes popular and a number of people have them, it's not this mass number of people that means that it's yet a channel to look at to get a big mainstream engagement. But nevertheless, there are amazing opportunities to use virtual reality to do some really inspiring, impressive things. This is one of my favorite things. Nothing to do with us. This is an experience called Wrench. It's well worth using, as it's incredibly interactive. It's not just a visual experience. It is stripping and rebuilding a virtual engine in a virtual workshop. So this is a training exercise as much as anything else. All the parts have to go in the right place in the right way. All the right tools have to be used and used in the correct way. This is a training technique. Now, if we look at what virtual reality actually does, it provides access. It provides access to things that we don't normally have access to because they're too big, or they're too expensive, or they're too far away, or they don't really exist yet. Access is an incredibly valuable thing to be providing. And in this case, providing access to training in mechanics or engineering to people who don't have access to these workshops, to these tools, to engines that they can just strip and take apart and put back together again. You can imagine, obviously, this is just an engine. You can take this to any extreme. And being able to find those areas where access to something is the problem that a business has, or that an institution has, or an educational facility has. Virtual reality is a very real way to provide that access and provide a very meaningful experience. Our experience of virtual things is dealt with by the same part of the brain that deals with the same things in real life, which is why these experiences are meaningful, because the brain doesn't distinguish. So you take these things into real life, not saying I'd have this guy rebuild the engine in my car immediately, but as a starting point, it's amazingly valuable. It can do amazing things. A different level of access. This is one of my favorite projects. This was done by a company called Framestore. Agency was McCann, Lockheed Martin were involved in this. It's a couple of years ago now, but I really like this. This was giving access to Mars to school children, young school children. And there's an interesting thing here, in as much as what we're looking to do here is take school kids on a bus trip on the surface of Mars. Now, most virtual reality experiences are very, very visual things. So one of the early adopters of VR was the automotive industry, basically, and there was a lot of this. There was a lot of sitting in the front seat of the new car, test driving in VR. test driving a car is not an entirely visual experience. In fact, I would say that the visual experience in test driving a car is one of the more minimal aspects of it. It's how does it feel? The seats, the smell, the steering wheel, the vibration as you accelerate, these things is what test driving a car is all about. So in this case, rather than just put headsets on kids and take them around Mars, actually used an actual school bus, mapped a region of the surface of Mars to the city grid where the school bus is. So you can actually drive the school bus around the city, and in fact the windows are screens that provide the virtual reality experience. So as far as the kids are concerned, they are on a real bus driving around this surface of Mars, which is really, really impressive. It must have been amazing. I wanted to do it, not only just the kids. But this is the impressive thing here is understanding how much of the experience has to be a tangible, tactile experience, and not just a question of putting headsets on kids, basically, and transporting them somewhere else. There are times when that is absolutely the right thing to do, however, to take someone somewhere else just using a very simple headset, and where logistically you want to use the quickest and the lightest way of doing something. This is something that we actually did do. Because one time when you like the idea of taking people somewhere else is if you're traveling, particularly with a family of young kids, Eurostar, 2-3 hour journey with young kids, who may not always be particularly quiet on that journey. This is giving them something, an experience to take them someplace else. This is using Google Cardboard, and it's just getting to a stage where we can turn the train into something transparent. So the kids just using cardboard, as you can see here, with the app, and you can look through the train and see this kind of undersea world outside the Eurostar. Dolphins and whales and jellyfish and mermaids, a completely realistic English Channel experience. And as you can see, the kids kind of love it. Very, very simple. Again, light touch. They're almost the polar opposite of what we saw with Mars, more akin to what we were looking at with the use of voice and the retired people. Just a very simple light touch to get people into this space where we can kill an awful lot of time, give them an amazing experience, and basically not have this kind of nightmare travel experience that we might be used to with young kids. And we're just picking up these basically at vending machines at the station. A very simple thing to do. Now with VR, what we're doing is getting someone who's in one's place and sending them somewhere else, which can be very valuable. But it's not always the thing we want to do. If we're looking at, say, retail, for example, we might work quite hard to get people to come in to the space that we've created. The last thing we might want to do is put them in a headset that takes them someplace else. But actually, if we're then starting to look at augmented reality, location-based things, where we can do the opposite then. We can actually get people who we want to be in a certain place to go there and to do something. So this is a very different way of looking at these XR experiences. This is something we did for Nike, e-commerce, but actually turning like the real world, outside stores, into an e-commerce place. In Sao Paulo, there are these graffiti characters that have been created, they've been around for a long time, and then they were erased. So we got the original artist to put them back, but actually to put on these characters limited drops of Nike shoes that were going to be exclusive, basically, and then allow people to go there and actually be able to buy the shoes from the graffiti, basically by recognizing the shoes, being in the space, being able to make a purchase. So again, a very, very simple thing to do. There aren't a lot of loops to jump through to get to this experience. It's very culturally relevant. And it's culturally relevant because it actually involves the city of Sao Paulo and these pieces of art that are very important to people. So here we can see the original with the shoe, being able to purchase the shoe. So a very simple thing, but something that brings people to a specific place rather than bringing them somewhere and then sending them someplace else. So again, understanding what we want from an experience before we choose the medium is very important, rather than jumping in and going, let's do something with VR, let's do something with voice, and then finding that in fact you're doing something which is counter to the objective that you're really looking to try and achieve. So lastly here, we're looking at artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence in 10 minutes is an interesting challenge, because you could spend a week on AI. It's a huge, huge subject, a nebulous subject. Lots of people I speak to in business are acutely aware of their need to be investing in and working with artificial intelligence, but they don't really know where to start. It's not helped by quite a lot of confusion in how artificial intelligence is spoken about in the media. So we see a lot of films and books and very, very intelligent, respected people talking about AI. And spoiler alert, none of this ends well. These are all somewhat downbeat messages. So there's a lot of fear around AI. But what's missing here is an understanding that what's being spoken about in these kind of things is light years away from some of the simple, tangible benefits that are available with the kind of systems that we use today. And that's really important. One of those, which is very popular, one of the first things that people often think about with AI bringing them to business, is customer service. It's something that comes up over and over and over again. So it's quite a nice little simple use case that has a lot of value. This is one that we did for Verizon. There are a lot of other ones. Autodesk famously had a really good automated customer service system. And with this, obviously, what you can do is take kind of the lowest, the simplest problems that people need solved, and solve them without them having to go through telephone systems and be on hold for ages, have warehouses full of people who are dealing with these simple problems. You want your people to be dealing with the nuanced, more complex issues that they are uniquely skilled for, and you can have these automated ways to deal with simple problems. We tend to deal with some of these through conversation, through chat. The key thing in doing anything with conversation and with chat is actually understanding that the experience is just as important as the answer you get at the end. So if you're having a conversation with a person who you know has the answer that you need, with a human, but that conversation feels really odd and awkward and it's slightly frustrating, you break off the conversation and go somewhere else. We don't want to lead people into these automated systems to find the answers that they need, where we can provide the help, the simple help that they need to be able to get on with their lives quickly. But then have a situation where a couple of questions in, they run for the phone to speak to a person. This is quite common. As again, with most things, most chatbots, are not great experiences. We understand the emotional response to dealing with chatbots and what people need, how they need to feel. You can make these systems work really, really well. So again, this is a case where understanding the experience is a really important part of applying these technologies successfully, rather than just putting things in, expecting people to use them, expecting them to work, because we've put them there and because they provide the assistance at the end of the journey. Health is another industry where AI is prevalent. There are some really big, big problems being confronted using AI. We're looking at the things that we've done with IBM, and well, not we've done with IBM, IBM have done with IBM, with trying to find ways to help people with cancer. There are some famous stories out there. They're worth looking up. And plenty of other huge problems. But there are some simple things too. A health client of ours are just interested to learn from people the reasons for them going to medical centers, basically, and understanding the kind of the issues that they have and the worries that they have. This is a very good opportunity for natural language processing and deep learning. And with the idea of them being able to help them by providing for them the information and the direction to take them to the very best provider of healthcare for them as individuals. These things can be very, very powerful. A question that comes up with AI when we're looking at these quite practical, quite kind of data-heavy, data crunching solutions is around creativity. There was a big conversation about AI and creativity. This is a story that surfaced 2 or 3 years ago. There's been others now that have taken this route. This was a movie called Morgan about a robot child. Obviously, it goes bad. People die. Get the picture. But these were the headlines. IBM Watson being the AI services at IBM, creates the first movie trailer. It's very sensational headlines. The truth is, actually, Watson did not create this trailer. But it did do some pretty wonderful things. And in fact, these sensational headlines tend to detract from the amazing thing rather than shed light on it. What they did was, Watson was trained to understand the emotional impact of the scenes that make up the film Morgan. Then it was given thousands of horror movie trailers to understand the selection of scenes that go up to make up trailers. Because there's a standard here, there's a form factor here. And then to select the scenes from the film Morgan that should be used to create the Morgan trailer. A person then stitched those scenes together to make a coherent narrative, added the music, decided when and where the character should be heard, where the graphics should come up, all these kind of things. So actually what we have here is a story of Watson, of AI, being part of a creative team, of a collaboration. This is a much more interesting story than these kind of rather sensational headlines. Although obviously they make good copy, and I read them all because of it. But the truth here is a really interesting one, is about that collaborative use of AI in a creative endeavor. And we put this to the test last year, where really just for our own benefit, for research purposes, became much bigger than that. We decided to see if we could use AI to create a new sport, which we ended up calling Speedgate. So the question was, could we get an AI to create a new sport? So our AI was trained on kind of history of sports, sporting mechanics, and we started to see what would come out. First sports that came out, tightrope tennis between 2 hot air balloons. There was something involving exploding frisbees. Not very practical. Demonstrated that our AI had no respect for human life. But that meant we had to feed back. We had to engage in an iterative rounds of conversations, basically. And we got to a point where we could road test some of the things we were getting and start to play them and then come back. We ended up with this sport, Speedgate. When we released the story of Speedgate, it took off. So that actually there are 40 countries that registered for Speedgate leagues. A bunch of universities, about a dozen or so, took it up. There are teams, there are people selling merchandise, nothing to do with us. We just kind of put it out there. But it's interesting how it's now recognized actually as an official sport. But it's interesting how you can get to something new through this collaborative process, basically. And that's really when you're looking at AI in a collaborative way. It's a team. It's part of a team. There's no replacement going on. And it was widely covered, which was very gratifying. So, just a few bits and pieces around these different territories. But in each case, there is a void that's been filled. There is a purpose behind what's been done. Nothing has been done purely for its own sake. So if we're looking at taking some of the wonderful things that we see here at ISE and seeing what we can do with them, we want to answer certain simple but very pointed questions. What is the problem that we are looking to solve? What is the issue that people have where these new technologies are an elegant way, a natural way to provide a solution? What are the new opportunities? What are the things where there isn't maybe an existing problem, but there is a space, there is something new that can be created that has real value in people's lives? And what is the behavior which either needs to change or would be adopted by people in having to use these things? Is it a natural way for people to behave? Because if it isn't, they're not going there. And if we understand these things and we look at these technologies and we're more fascinated with what we can do here than simply with what they do and how amazing it is, then hopefully we can all build some really amazing things and propel ourselves into the future with all of these amazing technologies. Thank you very much.